B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, March 19th, 2020. Donald Trump is fighting back against the coronavirus. He hasn't taken my advice to put a tariff on it yet. But he's fighting back with predictable racism and reflexive attacks on the media for criticism of his response that can only be described as richly deserved. So we continue to be in this kind of lockdown mode all across the country. People have had to stop working, take safety, shelter in place. And while the rules and regulations vary, the most affected communities are the state of California, state of Washington, and the state of New York. But the state of our stable genius is calm. He wants you to know that. He's very calm. And he is simply trying to share that with the people who make America great. But he's under increasing fire for his practice of calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus. And I want to credit Yamiche Alcindor. She's the White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, and she has shown great courage in confronting Trump calmly herself over his failures and his laughable claims of how he would give himself a 10 out of a 10 scale for his response to this crisis. And I didn't find a way to transfer it over, but somebody had texted me a video clip that is based on calendars, starting in January, then in February, then in March. And it shows the days when Trump made all of these ridiculous comments. We only have one case. We only have 15 cases. It's going to just disappear by April. And, of course, it was just this week that he said, I've been calling it a pandemic all along. And he falsely gives himself credit for blocking travel into the United States from China back in January. It mostly happened in his own mind. So as to this claim about the China virus, Trump says that it's his way of pushing back on Beijing for its suggestion that U.S. troops brought the coronavirus to Wuhan province, where it then spread. I'm not racist at all. It comes from China. That's why I'm calling it that. Now, this has angered Chinese officials, a range of critics. China experts say labeling the virus will only ratchet up tensions between the two countries, while resulting in the kind of xenophobia that American leaders should discourage. Asian Americans have reported incidents of racial slurs and physical abuse because of the erroneous perception that China is the cause. And I have a first-person account. Linda Ju is a woman I've known for many years. She lives in San Francisco, but she crossed the bridge here into glorious Marin County last weekend to meet a friend for brunch. That was before we were told not to do that. And she said she was getting these looks. And finally, a fellow diner didn't quite ask her to leave, but made comments that clearly suggested that he thought that she was a risk simply because she's Asian American. So 2 tweets yesterday, he referred to the Chinese virus. He insisted that he's simply pointing out a fact that it came from China. The White House has pushed out Kellyanne Conway, and they claim, well, nobody objects to the term Spanish flu. And I'm not an expert on the Spanish flu of 102 years ago, but there are accounts that say that nobody really knew where it came from. It just kind of picked up that name. So the Chinese government announced the other day that it'll be expelling journalists from major news outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Now, this is not direct reaction to Trump's claim that China is responsible somehow for the virus. But The Trump administration has recently limited the number of Chinese citizens working in the United States for 5 of their media outlets. And last week, Zhao Lijian, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman, we've shared this with you before, tweeted, "It might be the U.S. Army who brought the epidemic to Wuhan. Be transparent. Make public your data. U.S. owe us an explanation." Now, it's interesting because the New York Times, up front, even before they quote the foreign ministry spokesman, calls it a conspiracy theory. Now, we don't know where this virus has come from. I'm going to get to some speculation on that here in just a moment. But for the New York Times to declare that it is a conspiracy theory, when it's published, I'll put it this way, it has published no investigations that would declare that a lie or prove that it's true. So here's a statement from Charlie Wu, who is the public policy chairman of the Committee of 100, an organization of prominent Chinese Americans. "This crisis requires science, facts, and clear language, not fear-mongering, finger-pointing, and xenophobia by our public servants. We face a global pandemic that calls for a truly global unified response. Attempts to ascribe the virus to one culture, ethnicity, or country can only hinder this effort, alienating people who could instead collaborate and support one another." And our local San Francisco Chronicle picks up the story with a quote from Phil Ting, a San Francisco Democrat in the State Assembly, Chinese descent. "Trump's comments have created anxiety among many Asian Americans. It's embarrassing to have a president who not only doesn't put a stop to it, but really condones it and fuels that fire." They also quote Santa Clara University professor, whose name is Sherry Wang. "This is more than alienating Asian Americans. This is unsafe. Asian Americans not only have to carry this fear of getting sick and face the same level of risk as everyone else, but also have to deal with the emotional and psychological lack of safety, because you walk out the door and don't know if you could be physically attacked just by looking the way you are. And for weeks now, there has been zero business in San Francisco's Chinatown well before any orders were given to avoid crowds and stay inside and all that stuff. So racism is reflexive for Trump, and so is attacking the media. And I have to preface this by saying that the corporate media has deserved some of the swipes that Trump has laid at them because of the weak and sometimes false reporting on Russiagate. But he borrowed a line from Joe Biden, who smeared Bernie Sanders in the final debate last Sunday. And Biden was pivoting off of the smears of Bernie Sanders that were launched by Anderson Cooper and have been now very prominent in the Democratic primary, that Sanders was too cozy with dictators like Fidel Castro. And that because Bernie observed that China had reduced its poverty rate, then how that was somehow justifying the totalitarian regime of the Communist Party in China. So today Trump picked up that same theme. He said the press is very dishonest. They are siding with China. And in the news conference, and, you know, who was it? It was Bernie in the debate the other night who said that Trump should just shut up. But his ego is, what is it? His narcissistic supply, as Ford Green put it recently, has eliminated his public rallies. He can't get that kind of adulation. So instead of sending Mike Pence or other people out to talk to the media, Trump goes out and every day he fumbles, he bungles, he lies, he spins. He tries to con the American people into some sort of a strange place. And today, his narrative was littered with criticism of the media. Now, just on Monday, he said, I think a lot of the media actually has been very fair. I think people are pulling together on this. I really think the media has been very, very fair. But today, he was singing a different song. I have to say, he said, I think with social distancing that the media has been much nicer. Then he looked at the press room there at the White House. I don't know what it is, all these empty, these in-between chairs. You probably shouldn't have anybody sitting behind you either. I should probably go back, but I love it. It's so much nicer. Later he said, you did say a few days ago, actually this is a reporter, you said a few days ago, you had a sense that this pandemic was coming. So why was the United States not prepared with more testing and supplies? Trump said, we were very prepared. The only thing we weren't prepared for was the media. The media has not treated it fairly. He claimed that the Reporters Network had called him racist for calling the limits on travel from China during that country's initial outbreak of the virus. So when you say that I wasn't prepared, I was the first one to do the ban. Now other countries are following what I did. But the media doesn't acknowledge that. They know it's true, but they don't want to write about it. Then, when asked about the need for face masks and other protective gear, defensively he said to a reporter, you don't know what we've done. You don't know what's been ordered, what's not been ordered. I can only tell you that, as an example, masks. Nobody ever heard of the number of masks that's been ordered. They are being made now, and many are available now, but people, I think, in the media probably don't know that. Well, why don't you tell them? That's the purpose of a press conference. Then later, he explained that he could speak to the virus testing regimen because he's been through it, but only because you people were driving everybody crazy, asking whether he'd been tested, after he was exposed to all those Brazilians who've tested positive when he partied with them at Mar-a-Lago. Then later, he came back to the idea of spacing out the reporters in the room. You're actually sitting too close. We should probably get rid of another 75-80% of you. Have just 2 or 3 that I like in this room. I think that's a great way of doing it. We just figured out a new way of doing it. And then a likely member of that troika of reporters that he likes, Chanel Rion, I think that's how she says her name. She is the anchor on One America News. This is this right-wing network from San Diego that is slavishly devoted to the president. She's the reporter who went on a trip to Europe with Rudy Giuliani and filed 3 reports. I watched them. They were just dreadful. Not journalism, but movement media advancing the unproven claims of Giuliani, that there were Ukrainians who meddled in the 2016 election to help Hillary. And Ryan continued to just kiss Trump's ass. Major left-wing news media, even in this room, have teamed up with the Chinese Communist Party narratives, and they're claiming you're a racist for making these claims about Chinese virus. Is it alarming that major media players, just to oppose you, are consistently siding with foreign state propaganda, Islamic radicals, and Latin gangs and cartels? Wow! And they work right here at the White House with direct access to you and your team. Well, Trump sucked it up. He said this administration has done a great job, but the press is very dishonest. More than dishonest, they're siding with state propaganda. Ryan eagerly jumped in to help the president with. Then he went on to say, I think they do. They are siding with China. They're doing things they shouldn't be doing. They're siding with many others. China is the least of it. So why are they doing this? You'll have to ask them. But if we had an honest media in this country, our country would be an even greater place. And as you know, I have many criticisms of the corporate media in this country, and I don't put them aside at all. But this is simply deflection, an effort to find someone that Trump could claim he's been victimized by. And I think the central unifier in the Trump lovers, the MAGA madmen of America, is that they all feel like victims. They're victims because they're white. They're victims because, of equal opportunity or migrants. And Trump has become the victim in chief. So today I offer you for your reading, you'll find the links to these next 2 articles in the show file for today's podcast, available at peterbcollins.com. Where did this virus come from? Well, Phil Giraldi is a former CIA officer who I've interviewed many times. He is courageous, and he wrote a piece that's published at the Strategic Culture Foundation. And if you go to a fact-check site, you'll find that Strategic Culture doesn't get high ratings. But I don't care about that because I'm sure Phil Giraldi shopped this to many other outlets and they turned him down. So he opens with the mainstream theory that the coronavirus was derived from an animal-borne microorganism found in a wild bat consumed by an ethnic Chinese resident of Wuhan. But there appears to be some evidence to dispute that in the adjacent provinces in China, where wild bats are more numerous, they didn't experience major outbreaks of the disease. Because of that and other factors, there's also been considerable speculation that the coronavirus did not occur naturally through mutation, but rather was produced in a laboratory, possibly as a biological warfare agent. Now listen to this. He is speculating. There are a lot of modifiers and qualifiers in what he's saying. He is going through various theories. And I want you to be open to this, kind of a process. Then he goes on to say, several reports suggest there are components in the virus that are related to HIV that could not have occurred naturally. If it is correct that the virus had either been developed or even produced to be weaponized, it would further suggest that its escape from the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab and into the animal and human population could have been accidental. There is, of course, he says in the next paragraph, inevitably another theory. There's been some speculation that as the Trump administration has been constantly raising the issue of growing Chinese global competitiveness as a direct threat to American national security and economic dominance, it might be possible that Washington has created and unleashed the virus in a bid to bring Beijing's growing economy and military might down a few notches. And he reminds us of the Stuxnet computer virus that American and Israeli agents inserted into the Iranian nuclear laboratories. Then he approaches another theory. There's an Israeli story that just might shed some light on what's been going on in China. Scientists at Israel's Galilee Research Institute are now claiming that they'll have a vaccine against the coronavirus in a few weeks, which will be ready for distribution and use within 3 months. If one considers it possible that the U.S. had a hand in creating the virus at what remains of its once extensive biological weapons research center at Fort Detrick, it is very likely that Israel was a partner in the project. Helping to develop the virus would also explain how Israeli scientists have been able to claim success at creating a vaccine so quickly, possibly because the virus and a treatment for it were developed simultaneously. These are all theories I want to underscore. A few paragraphs down, then there is the national security foreign policy issue as seen from both Jerusalem and Washington. It's difficult to explain why coronavirus has hit one country in particular other than China very severely. That country is Iran, the often cited enemy of both the U.S. and Israel. The number of Iran's coronavirus cases continues to increase. The usual suspects, this a little bit later in the article, in the U.S. are delighted to learn of the Iranian deaths. Mark Dubowitz, who is the executive director of the Washington-based but Israeli government-connected Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, that's accurate, by the way, boasted on Twitter, "Coronavirus has done what American economic sanctions could not, shut down non-oil exports from Iran." And Giraldi concludes, so you have your choice. Coronavirus occurred naturally, or it came out of a lab in China itself, or even from Israel or the United States. If one suspects Israel and or the U.S., the intent clearly would have been to create a biological weapon that would damage two nations that have been designated as enemies. But the coronavirus cannot be contained easily, and it is clear that many thousands of people will die from it. And like Stuxnet, which was not contained in Iran and infected computer systems in other parts of the world, he fears the same for coronavirus. Then I want to thank super listener Faith Peoples, who sent me a link to a scientific paper published yesterday 2 days ago, at nature.com. There is a link to it. And it's a complex and technical piece. But let me just read their theory here. Again, it's a theory. It is improbable that SARS-CoV-2 emerged through laboratory manipulation of a related-like coronavirus. As noted above, the RBD of the new virus is optimized for binding to human ACE2 with an efficient solution different from those previously predicted. Furthermore, if genetic manipulation had been performed, one of the several reverse genetic systems available for beta coronaviruses would probably have been used. However, the genetic data irrefutably show that this new virus is not derived from any previously used virus backbone. So they have two theories. One is natural selection in an animal host before zoonotic transfer, and natural selection in humans following zoonotic transfer. Again, there's much more in that paper, and you can check it out if you follow the link to the nature.com website at peterbcollins.com. And right below that, I've listed a link to a handy dashboard with updated information about the pandemic. And you can just follow the link to that and check it out. We don't have a way of verifying or comparing it to the CDC or the Johns Hopkins websites, which is where a lot of people go for that kind of information. Now to our daily COVID-19 news summary, edited by Linda Lewis. She writes, "The best approach for the U.S. until a vaccine is available would be to test widely, isolate all who test positive. But it's not possible with tests in short supply. The best alternative is the one officials are now recommending: isolation, distancing, and limits on business activity. Compliance depends heavily on Congress getting financial aid to individuals who can't work and who have little in savings to feed themselves, pay rent, and otherwise maintain themselves at home in isolation. But Congress is dragging its feet in approving financial assistance to individuals." So the current scoreboard, the Jumbotron here in the United States, we have 10,442 confirmed cases and 150 fatalities to date. So Trump gave that news conference, and in addition to the smears of China and the media, he announced that he had signed the sick leave and family medical leave contained in the Families First legislation that was pushed through the Congress over the last 6 days. He said that some people view it as an act of God. I don't view it as an act of God. I view it as something that just surprised the whole world. And if people would have known about it, it could have been stopped in place, right where it came from, China. Well, that's his spin. He said that he invoked the Defense Production Act to help facilitate distribution of essential supplies. And then he went into sales mode. I want to share with you exciting progress that the FDA's making with private sector as we slash red tape like nobody's ever done it before to get very important things to the market. Oh, boy. He just can't help himself. You wish that at a time like this he could find some persona that is not as offensive and compulsively deceptive as the one we see every damn day. He is exploring the use of the drug chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine, a common malaria drug also used for arthritis. We're going to be able to make that drug available almost immediately by prescription, he said. Then he talked about the Gilead Pharmaceutical Company, which profiteers on its hepatitis drugs, and they have this product called Remdesivir that was developed for Ebola. It's not FDA approved. It's in the investigational use only stage, and so it is more of a possibility than something that is going to actually be put into motion in the near future. Then Trump turned to Mike Pence, the vice president, who said he had a call with over 5,000 state and local officials. Boy, they didn't get to talk much. That Trump signed the Family First Act, The Senate is working on an economic relief package. Trump and Pence will meet at FEMA for teleconference with governors. And state and private labs are now required to report the results of coronavirus testing to the CDC. Then we heard from Stephen Hahn, FDA commissioner. He said there's a cross-agency effort regarding convalescent plasma, and that's a way of learning about the virus from people who have experienced it. And as I mentioned, the 3 states where the cases are concentrated, more than half of the reported cases are based in New York, California, and Washington. And the White House official, Dr. Birx, said that that's where they are prioritizing testing and availability. Let's see, now we turn to Mike Pence claiming incredible progress with the passage of the legislation, and that there are protective masks that are in production now. In Italy, the death toll has reached 3,405, which is more than the toll in China, of course, a much bigger nation where it appears they were able to contain it through very extreme measures. State Department is advising Americans to refrain from travel abroad, but it is not officially banned. New data shows that men make up nearly 60% of people with confirmed cases of the virus. More than 70% of those who have died are male. From China, gender breakdown, 64% of the deaths were male, 36% female. South Korea, 61% of the infections were in women, but 54% of fatalities are male. Younger adults are much more vulnerable to this than many of them seem to believe, based on the pictures of spring break hangouts on the beach in Florida. According to CDC analysis of cases from the first month, February 12th to March 16th, 38% of those sick enough to be hospitals are under the age of 55. The French have confirmed that half of the 300 patients treated in intensive care units were younger than 65, half of the ICU patients in the Netherlands under the age of 50. So it does still seem to be sparing children. But adults of virtually every demographic group are at risk. China is reporting 0 new local infections in Wuhan. They said there were 34 new cases confirmed, all of them involving people who had come to China from outside the country. But this could be a critical day if there were actually no new cases. And I want to trust the Chinese, but I can't. And experts say we need 14 consecutive days without new local infections for this phase of the outbreak to be over. And then, if conditions are relaxed, people go back to work and continue kind of resume normal life, there could be a second wave. And that's what the experts are concerned about today. The Washington Post reports that Crown Prince Jared Kushner is running his own team of government allies and private industry representatives to work alongside the administration's official coronavirus task force. And Jared says, well, we're not trying to cause confusion here. We're just trying to access the brilliance of corporate America. Those are my words, not his. Here are his words. We're getting things done in record speeds and are doing everything possible to avoid damage and mitigate the negative impacts. In America, some of our best resources are in our private sector. The federal government is not designed to solve all our problems. A lot of the muscle is in the private sector and also a lot of smart people. Yeah. But what are their motivations, Jared? They want to do well while doing good. They want to, reward their greed as they attempt to solve some of these problems. And we have to focus on Jared Kushner's little brother, Joshua, who is the owner, at least an investor. He co-founded a health insurance company, which is called Oscar Health. and it launched its own digital portal that helps direct people to virus testing centers and assess their own risk of becoming infected. An activist, Kevin Zeese, sent out an alert today saying we need to investigate this to find out if, let's see, this is Trump's son-in-law's brother, is in a position to profiteer, and if the refusal to accept the tests from the World Health Organization might have been motivated by this. And with the thanks to Carl Howard for tipping me off, a fresh post over at The Intercept by the estimable Lee Fung. In recent weeks, investment bankers have pressed healthcare companies on the front lines of fighting the virus to consider ways that they can profit from the crisis. Over the past few weeks, investment bankers have been candid on investor calls and during healthcare conferences about the opportunity to raise drug prices. Yeah, they don't hide it. I've been trying to follow the plight of both the passengers and the crew from the Grand Princess, which was forced to hover off the coast of California before they allowed it to dock in Oakland about a week and a half ago. And at that point, many of the passengers who didn't have any active symptoms were sent into quarantine about an hour away in the Fairfield area at the Travis Air Force Base. Well, as of yesterday, 568 of the 858 passengers screened while confined have turned down taking a test to confirm their status with the coronavirus. 2/3 of those quarantined have declined. And why? Because the quarantine there is so miserable that they fear that if they test positive, they'll be forced to stay there even longer. Now, this is a critical, huge hole that you could drive a C5 through that really voids the purpose of detaining them to begin with. Now, interviews with some of the individuals who remain quarantined at Travis say that every day a couple of ambulances haul away some of their fellow former cruisers, and that they are livid that Mike Pence promised that everyone on that ship would be tested. They weren't offered a test when they were first arrived at Travis, and now many of them are calculating in ways that could hurt the effort to protect the rest of us. And speaking of cruise ships, a Holland America ship, the Maasdam, and the Norwegian ship, the Norwegian Jewel, both came into Honolulu and were told, we'll give you fuel, we'll let you resupply, but your passengers may not come ashore. And here in the Bay Area, bad boy billionaire Elon Musk is duking it out with the health authorities. He wants to keep the Tesla assembly line running. It's the largest workforce in the entire Bay Area, 10,000 people. And Elon is apparently trying to cut a deal. He wants to keep about 25% of the workforce on site. The company, which is not unionized, is being somewhat generous. They said if employees are feeling unwell, they can use their paid time off, and they can get 2 additional weeks of paid time off, even if they run out of it, and that the company will not discipline them for staying away from work at this time. Yesterday, I talked about how district attorneys are doing their best to let nonviolent offenders, pretrial people in lockup to be released to reduce their risk of exposure to the coronavirus. Well, some white-collar criminals are piling on to this. Michael Cohen, Trump's former personal lawyer, who actually should be sharing a cell with the Donald right now, and also Bernie Madoff, the Ponzi schemer. Both are filing appeals to be released from prison at this time. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast. Great people like Joe Clarici, Raul Castillo, who just upped his subscription, Perry DeLorenzo, who just took out a new subscription a couple of weeks ago, and Julie Anders, who just renewed an annual subscription. I am grateful to each and every one of you. If you're not a subscriber, you can change that. And if you are in a pickle financially, you can just tune me out. But if you're not in a pickle and you'd like to support my work, just drop by peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber. You'll hit the sign-up page, and I think you can take it from there. Yesterday, I expressed some outrage that the United States is not only maintaining sanctions on Iran, one of the hardest hit nations by the coronavirus, but they announced new ones. Mike Pompeo seemed proud of that. Well, I'm really shocked in what is, an outlet that is often an apologist for U.S. policy, the Washington Post, a lengthy commentary by Adam Taylor today. And he makes the case that this is deeply immoral. Britain apparently has tried to broker a deal to get the United States to lift some of the sanctions on Iran and approve an emergency loan from one of the World Bank agencies. And the U.S. has said no. And there are estimates that as many as 3.5 million people might die in Iran. And you can second-guess their response. There was initial denial. There was a slow reaction. But are we in any position to judge that in other countries? We don't have a lot to brag about here. The article even quotes Mehdi Hassan from The Intercept, who contrasted the Trump administration's sanction during this crisis unfavorably with George W. Bush's decision in 2003 to temporarily lift sanctions after an earthquake killed 26,000 in Iran. Quoting Hassan, the U.S. government is run by sociopaths. Now, this report says, and I didn't know this, the U.S. has offered some assistance to Iran through Switzerland, our diplomatic proxy, but Iranian officials have criticized the move as just hullabaloo. And British diplomats, as I said, have been trying to facilitate Iran's request for a $5 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund, but it appears the United States will not cooperate. And the closing comment here, the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign against Iran has resulted in little tangible benefit to the United States, but at the same time, the costs of the U.S. policy are growing. I would apply the same logic to Venezuela. Interesting piece at The Nation under the byline of Jet Here. And as he reviews the efforts in Washington to get cash into Americans who have been laid off or lost their jobs as a result of the shutdown of so many operations in the United States, and he posits, are congressional Dems to the right of the GOP? And in particular, Nancy Pelosi is being singled out for criticism because she is insisting on a means test. And yes, it does make sense that you don't just pass out, checks for a couple of $1,000s to people who don't need the money. But as she tries to negotiate that, it is delaying the legislation that would appropriate the money and allow the Treasury to send checks to people who really need it right now. And it is fascinating to see the roles reversed, because in years back, the Democrats were the free spenders, didn't pay much attention to the mounting deficits, and now Pelosi's trying to be fiscally responsible at a time when nobody else is and when it's not going to expedite the help that people need. Well, it had to happen at some point. And today is the day that Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii posted a video, and our friend John Zwiebel, a staunch supporter of Tulsi, forwarded me the video and her statement. Tulsi Gabbard is dropping out of the presidential race. And I want to say that I really welcomed her entry into the campaign. Last night I was reviewing tax-related stuff, and I saw that I used my credit card to give $1 to Tulsi, to Jay Inslee, to Julian Castro, to Elizabeth Warren, and there was one other. And I did so because Tulsi Gabbard provided very important functions in this presidential campaign. She repeatedly raised the issues of regime change wars that the Democrats have just gone along with and now become a hawkish party. And her position is active duty military, or I guess she's in the National Guard now, but she did 2 tours in the war zones, I think gave her great credibility. I will forever be grateful to Tulsi Gabbard for telling the truth about Kamala Harris and stripping the bark off her to the point where she had to drop out of the race much sooner than Tulsi Gabbard did. And I also feel that she was treated so badly by the Democratic National Committee. And remember, in 2016, she resigned from the DNC in protest of the way they were cheating against Bernie Sanders in the coronation of Hillary Clinton. And just recently, they changed the rules to allow Mike Bloomberg into the debates, and then they changed the rules again to keep Tulsi Gabbard out of the last debate this past Sunday. I think it's deeply offensive to the process that the networks can just pick and choose who they invite. And they have the facade of the DNC as the authority that makes those decisions. But she was a bona fide candidate at the time. She met the criteria that had been set before it was changed. And I believe that the DNC owes her a deep apology. In her statement, she gave a shout out to Bernie Sanders and Jane and expressed her affection for him. And then she said this: although I may not agree with the vice president on every issue, I know he has a good heart, is motivated by his love for our country and the American people. I'm confident that he will lead our country guided by the spirit of aloha, respect, and compassion, and thus help heal the divisiveness that has been tearing our country apart. I know they have to say that crap. And get ready. Bernie's going to be delivering a similar speech in the not-too-distant future. Finally today, I'm not giving up on telling the truth about Joe Biden. Fact-checkers at the Washington Post examined his Me Too comment in the debate with Sanders on Sunday. Because Bernie said, I'm going to stop fracking as soon as we possibly can. No ifs, buts, and maybes about it. And Biden said, so am I. Sanders said, well, I don't think your proposal does that. Biden interrupted, he interrupted no more. No new fracking. Well, his campaign walked that back almost as soon as the debate was over. And the issue really hasn't been revisited by the media. But it has been picked up by Republicans who now want to tag Biden as anti-fracking to hurt him in fracking states like Pennsylvania and Ohio. But flatly, the Biden campaign has said he misspoke. His position is the same as ever. He will issue no new fracking permits for federal lands or waters while allowing existing fracking operations to continue. And another fact-checker, Sam Husseini, he runs the Institute for Public Accuracy. He wants to remind you that Joe Biden has lied about his position on the Iraq War. He chaired the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He excluded opponents of the war from testifying. There is detail in here. He also points out that John Kerry has been actively supporting his pal, Joe Biden. Quote, it's remarkably fitting the Biden camp has put out Kerry on this issue since Kerry's falsifications regarding Iraq are remarkably similar to Biden's. Kerry might be the only Democratic senator whose record helped the Iraq War as much as Biden's. And I do have one more story here. The film director, Ava DuVernay, has been sued by Linda Fairstein. Fairstein was the district attorney who prosecuted and falsely convicted the Central Park Five. And in her award-winning series on Netflix called When They See Us, DuVernay portrayed Fairstein in a way that I think is probably accurate. But Fairstein is crying foul, has filed a lawsuit claiming defamation. And so while you have time and you're using Netflix more often, feel free to check out DuVernay's series. I watched one episode, and I just found that it was overproduced and was more emotional than what I care for. So I want to recommend, I think you can get it on Netflix, Ken Burns and his daughter Sarah produced a documentary back in about 2014. I interviewed Ken at the time about it. It's called The Central Park Five, and it is an excellent presentation of the real facts in that case. Well, I want to wrap up with a tip for you. If you have time on your hands and you hang out on Facebook, go to the page called COVID Concert Series. I got invited to this page a couple of days ago by Marianne Stone, who worked with me at a radio station in San Francisco way back when. And this morning I clicked on it, and a guy named Tommy Givens gave a really cool blues guitar presentation with a backing track or maybe other musicians who weren't on camera. And all these people are performing from their homes into your homes. And we'll give Roy Rogers a break today and give you a little sample of the Hoodoo Rhythm Devils.
All God's children are safe in their homes. All good people who live right, love the night. All God's children are safe in their homes. All good people who live right, love the night.
Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You can share it all over the place. And except for this musical part at the end, you'll find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B. Collins.